Hey everyone. I was sitting in Jeremiah chapter 2 today, first 8 verses, and the Lord gave me a couple questions. And the first question the Lord gave to me is, how often, Jason, do you look at what sins you may have committed in your life? And the second was, how often do you look at why you committed those? So I want you to ask the same questions to yourself. How often do you look at what sins you committed, and how often do you look at why you committed those? Because what and why are what drives Jeremiah chapter 2, verses 1 to 8 and following. What the Israelites did was they defiled the land, the rulers transgressed against God, and the prophets prophesied to Baal. These are extreme grievances. Taking that which God has given you and defiling it, probably not a good idea. Sinning against God and prophesying to another God who isn't really a God at all, definitely not a good idea. With all this in mind, we now recognize the what here is vastly more significant if we see why the Israelites did these things. The Lord ultimately says the wrong committed by the Israelites was not remembering. You hear that? It was not remembering. God's people did not say, "Oh, where's the Lord who brought us from the land of Egypt, who led us in the wilderness?" See, this lack of their remembering what God had done for them is why the Israelites sinned. And the many things mentioned earlier. Remembrance is key, my friends. A huge key to all of the Old Testament is remembering what God has done for you so that you won't sin, but instead truly worship and pursue a deeper relationship with God. This is also the crux of the New Testament. When spreading the gospel, each disciple actually teaches people to remember what Jesus did, not only on the cross, but in all that he taught. As a matter of fact, you can look at the two most significant commands, arguably, by Jesus, and they both involve remembering. At the Last Supper, Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me. Well, likewise, in the Great Commission, Jesus tells the apostles, go and make disciples, teaching them everything that I did for you, and teaching them to obey. How did they teach these things without constantly remembering and refreshing their minds? At the end of the Great Commission, Jesus even says, behold, or remember, depending on your translation, I am with you always. Remember, I am with you always. Friends, the Lord uses Jeremiah very clearly here to remind the Israelites of why they sinned. The what continues for all of chapter 2 and even further. They forgot God's activity in their life. The Lord even intentionally says here that he remembers. When the Israelites were faithful to him, he remembers it. When they were holy unto him, God remembers. This doesn't mean the Lord forgot. That's absurd, right? But rather, the Lord actively brings to mind these times where Israel was faithful, bringing these memories to the forefront. We must seek to mimic the Lord here in actively recalling all those times when God's been faithful to us, as well as the vast encounters of God experienced by our brothers and sisters who've gone before us. When did you last encounter God? How has God moved in your life over the last week, month, year? Think about the times when you've sinned. Might those have been avoided if you actively recalled God's movement and interaction with you regularly? Think of some of the different moments where God has moved in your life. Maybe prayers God has answered, times when the Spirit has overwhelmed you or taught you, even worship moments when you've encountered God. Write all of them down. Reflect on these. Not only when life is hard or you feel far from God, but always reflect on these. When you reflect on God's active involvement in your life, it's much more difficult to sin and pursue things of the world. This is why I encourage you and myself to write prayer requests. so people see God's movement in their lives. Whether you realize it or not, God is moving in your life and has moved in your life. If this is not evident to you, then maybe you don't take the time to recall God's action and allow for your spiritual eyes to be open. Maybe once you have the answer, you move on to the next thing. I want to close today with a quote by Abraham Joshua Heschel. Let this hit you right here. Much of what the Bible and our God demands can be compromised in one word: remember.